Alright, so we are in Santa Ana, heading to the Frida Cinema, and just got a nice, it's very nice around here. You wouldn't think driving around Santa Ana, it's like, ooh, this place is ugly, but they got some nice spots. So we're going to go meet up with Coker right now up at the cinema for that free screening of Fright Night with Tom Holland. Where are we at right now, Coker?
Oh, we are in Santa Ana at the Frida Cinema to go see a free screening of the 1985 vampire classic Fright Night with a Q&A with Tom Holland in person. And all of this is going to be curated by my good friend Miguel Rodriguez, the director of the film festival that I'm a committee member for, Horrible Imaginings Film Festival, that is going to be at this cinema come August and September.
Yeah, and as of right now, it's 6 o'clock, so we have until 7:30 till they start letting us in.
Yeah,
so
got a little while away.
Killing some time here, but yeah, if anyone we know comes up, we'll probably get them on camera here too, so you can see. And of course, when Tom Holland comes in, we'll get him on camera too. So, yeah, what are you drinking right now?
Jamaica.
Jamaica. Good. Was it well worth the money? No, sir. How much?
When the creator of so many great all things horror, Mr. Tom Holland.
Which is interesting since I'm interviewing you now, but I'm going to start with the question you asked me, which was why Fright Night is the one that a lot of people remember so much.
I was surprised that so many of you hadn't seen it.
I was a little surprised too, but I'm kind of stoked. Although we brought the kids too. We're throwing, yeah. I applaud you, parents. You're excellent parents. I first saw this when I was about your age. That's awesome. Sleep well today. I have some ideas I want to throw your way, Tom, and I'm just going to start this off just by asking what you think about these ideas. So when Fright Night came out, it was 1985, and it was in the middle of the 80s slasher craze, which this film addresses with a lovely appearance by Roddy McDowell, who I hope you talk about a little bit. But, this film blends so much that a lot of film fans adore about the vampire mythos. We've got a little bit of Bela Lugosi thrown in there, a little bit of Murnau's Nosferatu thrown in there. We've got a little bit of teen comedy thrown in there, a lot of teen comedy thrown in there. And of course, like the Hammer horror kind of feeling as well. I think there's so much that we find both familiar and entrancing about vampire movies throughout history that we all have something to latch on to. That's my feeling. So talk about what elements of that history went into making Fright Night, and did any...
Actually, one of my favorites.
I wanted that video game so bad.
Everybody knew it through the 90s, then it went out of rotation. But anyway, that was supposedly based on a Cornell Woolrich short story called The Window, which was the juvenile version of Rear Window, also written by Cornell Woolrich. And I was working on it, and I said, well, if you really wanted to do this, what should happen is a horror fan should look out his window and see a vampire chomping down on a girl next door. And of course, nobody's going to believe him because he's a gonzo horror fan to begin with. And Universal definitely did not want that for Cloak and Dagger. and so after that was done, the story wouldn't leave me alone. And I didn't know, it was a concept, not a story. And then, I don't know how, but all of a sudden the character of Peter Vincent snapped into my head. And once that happened, I couldn't wait to get home and start writing. Now, I grew up with Hammer and AIP films. Yeah, so they Christopher Lee was my vampire. And so that's what this is what I'm reminiscing about here. And it was also a period where, this is hard to believe, but vampire films were out of style. Nobody wanted to make one. They thought the genre was dead. They thought vampires were were gone and never to be revived. And that was because the last vampire film done before Fright Night was Love at First Bite. Anybody remember? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I mean, when a genre descends into satire, that means that usually means it's exhausted and at the end of its run. And they'd also had a huge disaster previous in 79 or 80 with the musical version with Robert Wise directed.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
It was a huge Broadway play. Dracula?
It was Dracula. I'm trying to remember who was Dracula in that.
Well, it was the guy who played in the Addams Family who passed away. I think. Anyway.
Raul Julia.
No.
No, because I don't think, is John Astin still with us? John Astin's still with us.
Al Lewis?
No, I can't remember. Huh? Everybody? Okay. Anyway.
Frank
Langella, yes.
Also
Frank
still with
Langella.
us. Very romantic.
So they'd had a huge, multi-million-dollar disaster with the musical the stage musical of Frank Langella. Then they did a comedy spoof, and nobody went to see it, and so nobody wanted to hear about vampire films. But I was very lucky and was able to slip Fright Night in, and in some ways, it's the beginning of the cycle that we're still in, even though. And I grew up watching what they called the Friday Night Frights. This is when you couldn't find a horror film on TV except at 11 o'clock on Friday night on your local channel. And when I was their age, that's what I did every Friday night at 11 o'clock. And so that's what this is about. It's a love letter to horror/vampire fans everywhere. And I think it's totally amazing and gratifying that here we sit 33 years later. I mean, that's like it's a miracle to me. But the only reason I think that it's happening and that this film has lasted so long is because you can feel the affection for the genre and for vampires. And partially it's a lot of fun because the situation's very funny. A horror fan who's convinced that a vampire's next door, who's going to believe that? Anyway, so I'm just thrilled. And I don't know, I said to my wife a couple of years ago, did you ever think we'd end up at this point in our lives here? And my wife said to me, here wasn't there when we were younger. This is something that is I don't know, it's been going on 10 or 15 years now. The revival theaters for horror films, the horror conventions, and the growing acceptance of the genre, the breakout into tent poles with Stephen King's It. You know, I mean, it's there's something happening here in the genre.
Got that sleeve for you.
So anyway, thank you.
It's mine now. Oh, gosh. Well, before anyone steals this, I want to ask this question. For me as a kid, when I was about their age, the scariest vampire I'd ever seen is Amanda Bierce. For those of you who are wondering who Amanda Bierce is, before she was the nosy neighbor on Married with Children, she was Charlie Brewster's girlfriend with a huge mouth at the end. And I remember I got a Fright Flicks trading card with a picture of her on it that said, "Man, that soup is hot." But there were so many different kind of monsters in this film. Can you talk about the design of, you've got the gatekeeper, the kind of like Renfield-esque character, her vampire, the bat, and of course Jerry Dandridge, and they all have their own character.
I was very lucky. I got the best effects team in Hollywood at the point. It was Richard Edlund, and it was the team from Ghostbusters. Oh yeah. Yeah. So the guys who did Ghostbusters, after they were finished with that, came on and did Fright Night, and this was the state of art. State of the Art in 1984. And just terrific. It was a way of Columbia keeping them on the payroll and making sure that they didn't go anywhere. They thought this was the throwaway film in their schedule. And the big hope that Columbia had in that year was a picture called Perfect. Anybody remember? John Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh, God.
Two hottest actors in Hollywood at that point. And Fright Night. So you never know. You just don't know. And we threw in terms of effects, I ranged through everything that the state of the art could do at that point. This is all in camera. This was before CGI. There are a couple of shots where you're marrying images. There are matte shots, but otherwise everything's in camera. Took a lot of time.
We just have one more, and then I'm going to open it up, and I'll probably run around to give you guys some microphone time. But I have to hear about working with Roddy McDowell, the great Roddy McDowell.
Well,
Uh-oh, is this a sore subject?
yeah, no. Roddy was terrific. I'm writing Fright Night 3, Resurrection, the novel now. And I hope to have it out before Christmas. But when I did the first draft, I didn't know, I couldn't figure out whether or not I should put Peter Vincent in it. And it didn't seem right with Roddy gone. And then when I finished it and I read it through, I thought, well, if you don't have Peter Vincent, you don't have Fright Night. So I'm rewriting it, putting Peter Vincent in. Roddy was Peter Vincent. Roddy came to me and said, this is the cowardly lion from Wizard of Oz. And that was his image for Peter Vincent. And I think one of the things that makes the story work as well as it does is you have a character arc or a journey of a man who starts out and his whole life is based on fakery, on bad B movies. And then he finds himself caught up in one for real. And you see him rise to the occasion. And we all wish that we could do that or have a moment like that in our lives where we could do that. And I think that Roddy just played it beautifully and is one of the things that makes the movie last as long as it has. Roddy was a very nice man who could also he could also be very cutting. But Roddy was everybody's friend. He'd grown up and going to school at MGM and then at 20th. And he grew up with a bunch of kids like Elizabeth Taylor. And I listened to his stories and I said, my goodness, you gotta write an autobiography. And he said he couldn't because he really knew where all the bodies were buried.
The new Kenneth Anger. On that note, he also gifted the world with the one full nude photo of Elizabeth Taylor. Not to be crude, but hey, that's a great thing. All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience.
Yes, I do.
You go first. So I'm going to get on my feet.
Hello. Watching this movie has a lot of the one thing in the vampire mythos that you had always wanted that you put into this to kind of be like, yeah, this is my mark on the take on the vampire, and this is completely unique to anybody else's.
Okay, I put the situation's funny, and so this has a comedic element, but it doesn't look down on the genre. It doesn't break the third wall and wink at the audience. It stays within the reality of the situation, so it stays believable for everybody. And better? Yeah, a little bit better. I think combining the laughs as well as it did, and it worked because of the cast. I was looking for people that actors that could do it, that could do the terror and the seriousness, but also could make you laugh. And that's why I cast Amanda Burse. Every ingenue I looked at was beautiful and voluptuous and played the girl in peril, but Amanda could make me laugh. Yeah, on the transition where she's talking to Charlie and she says, I forget what it is, but she says, I don't believe that. And there's a match cut from the mother to Charlie in there. She made that funny. They got the laughs. Even Chris Sarandon got the laughs. You know, I mean, it's hard to find actors who can play the reality of the situation and can also make you grin. But by playing the reality of the situation, not by winking at the audience and letting them know that they're in the joke. I think if you break the third wall, then you kick the audience out of believing in this situation. You want to be in for the ride. And you don't want to be disturbed. And this cast gave me all of those things. It's just a terrific cast.
I like to run.
Well, first off, it's an honor.
Okay?
I just was curious, sitting here with you, watching your film, how is it sitting with us and watching your own film? Do you, when you're watching a scene, do you go back and just picture how the set was and watching the scene be filmed? Or do you try to, I don't know, do you go, well, maybe I wish I would have done this different? And Joe, I'm just curious.
Okay, not on this one very much.
I figured it's a masterpiece.
But, I mean, you know, where you really watch it is on the previews. I mean, that's where I'm really watching the audience, how they react to the film. Child's Play. Chris Sarandon's in the cop car, and all of a sudden Chucky attacks him in the cop car, right? And he's running around, and he's driving, the doll's trying to choke him, and all of a sudden the blade comes up between his legs, right? Every guy in the audience, I'm like, ah! You know, I mean, I could sit at the back of the theater, and I could watch the entire male audience, right? So that's a lot of fun to watch, you know? And you see that the gag worked as you intended. I don't know, because like what I said, you know, at the beginning, I never expected to be here.
Right.
Because none of this was going on. This was not possible. This was not happening, you know, when I made the film. And so I'm sort of amazed, I'm very grateful, because there's no such thing as immorality. We all slip into obscurity. You're hardly ever remembered after the one generation after you. Okay, and the ones that have the best chances are those that enjoyed probably the greatest commercial success in their lifetime. So it's really amazing to me that this, Child's Play, Psycho 2, they're the ones that seem to go on. I have my own personal favorites like Cloak and Dagger that people have forgotten Cloak and Dagger. So it all depends upon the rotation of the major companies and where they're putting it. And everything is changing so fast because we're going streaming, and there's not enough content. So everything is being shoved out at you, and I don't know. It may be getting harder for creative work to survive because there's such a plethora of it now. I mean, these are all things that question brings up, and I don't know, but I'm very grateful and I'm totally surprised.
As you want to about, I'm going to go 2, and I'm going to go 3. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, Mr. Holland. You were talking about, you don't know when a movie's gonna hit. And you're talking about the juxtaposition between Cloak and Dagger, which I saw that in the theater, and Fright Night, which I also saw as a child on video. But I wonder if you think about the cultural impact, right? Because there's a reason there's people in this theater and these films still resonate. And I think about the timing of Cloak and Dagger and the Cold War. And I think about the timing of this film and the AIDS epidemic, because we just, as a country and really as a world, started seeing the fun, carefree sex of the 60s and 70s suddenly got really scary, really quick, and people going to clubs like Club Radio in the film, suddenly it wasn't so casual anymore. You couldn't just pick somebody up because you didn't know if that person could make you sick and could make you die, right? And here's this dark stranger that shows up and seduces all these women, and what happens after they have a night with them, they end up dead. So I wonder if you look back now, even not maybe writing in that time, but do you think that maybe this movie captured the audience at that time because it gave them some breathing room away from war, but breathing room in a time where sex and sexuality and stuff got really scary?
Boy. This reflects 1984 and leading up to there. I played an undercurrent of gayness in it. I mean, it's very subtle, but it's there. When Chris Sarandon looks at Evil Ed and says, "Here, take my hand. You won't have to be afraid anymore." I mean, I can't tell you how many gay kids as adults have come up to me and tell me how meaningful that scene was to them. It's not accidental, but it's certainly not something I expected. Because when I made it, being gay was still sotto voce, so, something that you couldn't hit it on the head. I don't. It's hard because it was only after that, by the late '80s, that the scourge of AIDS, became apparent. I really wasn't aware of it then, but I remember I had a best friend, a dear friend, and I invited him to the screening, to the premiere at the Academy, and he didn't come, and I was mortally offended that somebody that I'd known for 20 years hadn't shown up at the first movie I directed. And I didn't contact him for about a year and a half, and I called him up, and I found that he was dying of AIDS, and he was too sick, and that's why he hadn't been at the premiere. So there are stories, but I didn't mean to be promoting licentiousness either in the film. I don't know how to answer that question, really. I think it reflects the time, but I didn't have a point. Didn't have a point of view on it particularly. I mean, I felt that vampires wanted to suck your blood, and they didn't care what sex you were, because the relationship between Billy, the Renfrew character, and Chris Sarandon it's obviously sort of close. But I mean, I just took it that that Jerry Dandridge didn't matter, who he picked. But I don't know. I know as a general rule that horror reflects better than any Hollywood movie what's happening in society more quickly, because horror has always been sort of the red-headed stepchild, and it's the cheapest to produce, and therefore it's the quickest to react to whatever's going on in society of any of the genres. I hope that answers your question.
Hello. Me and my friend were just reading about your involvement with other films that you did, and I saw that you were involved with the remake, and I was just curious how you got involved, if you just heard they were remaking and you felt that since this was your film previous, it was your right to be involved in that process. I was just curious what that was like for you.
You're talking about the remake of Fright Night?
Yeah, what was it like to see your film remade, and what was it like to be involved in the process of that?
Okay, it was perfectly horrible. 101. Nobody ever talked to me. Nobody called me. Okay, so Chris Sarandon had a big part in it. And Chris, I'm talking to Chris, I don't know, a couple of months ago. And Chris tells me when he did the big part, they told him that it was not a strict remake of Fright Night. It was, Fright Night was a jumping off point, gave them a bit of a premise, but they made no attempt to actually do a remake. Well, maybe that's why I thought it was so bad. Now, I'm prejudiced, and I know a lot of people who liked the remake. But in terms of what makes this film work, they disregarded every moment. There was no humor in it. There was no heart in it. What they did to the poor actor who played Chris Sarandon, who was what's his name? Yeah, Colin Farrell. They gave him nothing to play. Compare the range that Jerry Dandridge has in this film of what they gave Colin to play. Now the remake was extremely competent production-wise. And they paid me a nice check, which to some extent lessens the pain. But let's talk about Hollywood too. I mean, John Carpenter says nobody ever calls him when they remake his stuff. At least they send him a check and it's bigger than mine. But I mean, it still doesn't take away the sting. This is very personal. This is me at 14, 15, 16. I mean, that's why I wrote it on spec. You know, that's like sitting down and spending, I don't know what, 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 10 weeks of your life, whatever it takes. And there's no payoff. You're doing it. I did it because the story was inside of me, because I remembered what it was like. And I just had a lot of affection for that period in my life, and for what these movies, for what the AFP Hammer films did for me. And so when you lose control and somebody else remakes it, I wish the hell they kept the goddamn money and never remade the film.
Mr. Holland, thank you so much for being here. On behalf of everybody here at the Frida Cinema, can you hear me? We're good? I'm over here. Yeah, there you are. So if we can give Mr. Holland a round of applause.
Thank you.
One more question. You mentioned that this is your directorial debut, which a lot of people may have not known. Your first feature film ever, and here we are 30 plus years later. So thank you for everything that you've done for the genre to push it forward and really set the stage for a lot of filmmakers, whether they be young, new, old, everybody. What was your experience going onto set for the first time? What's the first thing you remember? How did you feel when it all ended? How do you feel now that you're sitting here and we're sitting in this legacy of yours?
Well, I probably haven't been as well prepared for a film since, because I was so scared. You know, I storyboarded out the whole thing myself by hand. I went in with a book this thick of all the storyboards, and it's amazingly a number of the shots ended up in here. Okay, so that's what it was like then. And you asked for something else, intermediate stage, and then how do I feel now? How do I feel now? Well, as I said, I'm very grateful. I really am. And I say that with, I never expected this. Think it. Come on. This is, no, I don't know. Maybe, this is not, Congress is not going to make this one of the films in the National Endowment. So, it's not like I'm Orson Welles or anything. I'm a popular entertainer. That's what I have a whole bunch of films and TV shows and Tales of the Crypt and I did 3 of them. I did the one with Brad Pitt. I discovered Brad Pitt. You know, but I'm not. I don't know. I'm not a serious intellectual weighted down with social problems who's writing that. Whatever there is inside of me, I've always wanted to make you laugh and have a good time and fall in and have a 90 minutes of getting away from whatever it is out there. And so I'm amazed and I'm grateful. And no, I never expected this, because when I did this film, my generation, we never thought that films would last beyond a year or two. You know, I mean, it was a disposable, you know, it's sort of amazing. And it gives me something to do at this point in my life, which is just wonderful. and I meet young people too. So I mean, I stay younger too, and I'm getting feedback, and it keeps me in touch with the popular culture. And it's just goddamn, it's better than sitting in an old age home.
I've got to tell you that, you know, people like me and Logan and Zishan and the Frida here, we do rep programming like this for the exact reason that you stated kind of at the beginning, is we are dedicated to the longevity of this art form and dedicated to the longevity of films like this. By the way, I mean, this AFI is number 101, right? Anyway, so, I mean, again, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this film. This, I think, has meant a lot to a lot of us, and I think we are breeding the new generation.
It's sort of interesting. I mean, Child's Play has had a much bigger success. I mean, I wrote and directed the first one. I created Chucky, I named the little guy. but that's made, I think, around 300 million or 300, worldwide now. So it beats the hell out of this in terms of monetary gain, not to me, but to the studio and to the people who merchandised it. But this film, Fright Night, because now this is the first year, well, I started last year, but the first year I've gone to conventions, horror conventions, and I can tell you, in terms of the audience, this is the one that gets the affection. You know, this is the one that gets the love. And it's really interesting. And I still don't quite know what to make of it, but it says something about the culture. You want to take it now, or should I?
Sure. We could keep going a long time, but I think it's almost time to say goodnight to our amazing audience. Holy cow!
Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to do a reminder that, you know, we're going to have 3 days of stuff like this coming up.